Thank you everyone for joining today's webinar. Our topic is going to be around smart SEO crawling strategies. So specifically around flexible SEO and crawling your site and the flexibility that is required. I'm using a presenter view for one of the first few times, which is, bear with me. Cool. So brief introduction on our end. My name is Jeremy. I sit on the solutions engineering team at Lumar, basically helping people walk through demos of the platform. I've worked here at Lumar for around 2 years, and then previously at another enterprise SEO platform. So very familiar with flexible crawling strategies and everything that goes into it. And Chris.
Yeah, and my name's Chris. I'm a member of the professional services team. Basically, my job is with the kind of the SEO practitioners, I suppose, that sit inside Lumar. I've been an SEO for 15 years, almost all that time in kind of enterprise level sites. So spend a lot of time working with very, very big sites, doing an awful lot of flexible crawling.
Now, in terms of the agenda for today's call, quite a few different topics that we want to cover in regards to flexible crawling strategies. First, we're going to go through some introductions and housekeeping. But in terms of topics, crawl scope, frequency of sources, mobile versus desktop Parity crawls, custom extractions, user agents and regional IPs, crawling staging versus live sites, and then just diving into some of our Lumar product highlights in regards to flexible crawling. And then we're going to wrap up with some questions and answers. Feel free to type that in the chat as we go. We're going to be addressing them at the end of our conversation today. Now, just in terms of just some accessibility, we wanted to highlight the closed captions. You can see below within your Zoom link, if you click on that CC captions icon, you can enable closed captioning by clicking on that and then selecting show subtitle. If you don't see it, you can most likely click on the ellipses, and then the closed captioning icon is somewhere along those lines. We also have enabled live transcript. So if you want to access that, you can also click within the closed caption icon and then choose view live transcript. Keep in mind that this webinar is going to be recorded and we will distribute it within a few days, and that will have full subtitles included. Now, in terms of just some general housekeeping questions, again, please type those into the box, the QA box at the bottom of the screen. We will address them at the end of the conversation, but feel free to type those in as we go through. Feedback, you will be getting a survey at some point at the end. This is going to be a very quick survey, just helps inform us around different things that you've heard, as well as what is important for us to dive deeper into in subsequent webinars and the platform itself. And then lastly, the on-demand, like we mentioned, is going to be released following the webinar in a few days. So everything is going to be recorded. So no need to vigorously write notes. We will send out that post webinar. Cool. Before we dive into our presentation, we just have a quick poll question to ask the team or the crowd here. What is your biggest challenge when it comes to crawling your website? And we'll give everyone a minute or so. Type in your answer.
I always find this stuff fascinating because it's always basically boils down to, I think for most people, not enough data or too much data. And it's always interesting to see which side that falls on, because I think you spend all your life with one and then you end up with the other.
Yeah. Having too much data is always annoying to parse through. Yeah. And it looks like that's pretty in line, parsing and understanding all data. Crawl speed is too slow, coming at 29%. Third highest is my tool doesn't allow me to connect additional external data sources for more enriched data. That's 18%. And then lastly, my tool doesn't allow me to only crawl specific site sections, which is 6%. Thank you for answering that survey. I will say everything that is listed there, we are going to address today. So very excited to dive into what we're going to be going into. Starting off with crawl scope. So I think this answers, I think, the first within that survey around not being able to crawl specific sections of your site. The crawl scope starts with defining the boundaries, which means setting precise limits on the pages to be crawled. This step ensures that crawl focuses on relevant areas of the website while conserving resources. So we're going to start with the site sections specifically. It's vital to target specific sections of your site. If you're, crawling, let's say, just your blog pages or your product pages, we want to have an approach that ensures the crawl is concentrated on relevant SEO goals. The next is considering URL patterns. So by using URL patterns, you can effectively include or exclude certain pages in your crawl. So it's a method that allows for a more refined and targeted approach, and that ensures that your resources, are used efficiently. Depth limits is speaking to how many clicks it takes to get to certain parts of your site. So how many clicks deep into the crawler you would like to go into your site. It's along the lines of like balancing between, thoroughness and resource allocation. Essentially, we want to make sure that the crawl is deep enough to be useful, but we also want to make sure it's not wasting resources. And then lastly, another crucial aspect is selecting file types. You might want to choose to include or exclude specific file types like PDFs, images, all depending on maybe what your SEO objectives happen to be. We have a short use case at the bottom there around e-commerce, but maybe I'll throw it off to Chris to just highlight maybe an anecdote that he's heard in the ether around crawl scope.
I mean, there's kind of two parts to that. Is number one, crawl boundaries are super important. Whenever we bring on a new client, somebody always says, "Oh, we want everything." Nobody wants everything. I can almost guarantee you, if you have a website over about 1,000 URLs, you don't want everything. You want almost everything, I'll grant you, but you don't want everything. So working out what you do and don't need is really important. Again, when Jeremy mentioned things like depth limits, you don't need to crawl 300 levels deep to know that you have a pagination problem. You could probably work that out at 40 levels deep or 30 levels deep. And sort of simultaneously, as you said at the bottom here about e-commerce, not just product pages as well. We work with a big auction site that they have so many individual product pages. There's too many to really focus on. So their real focus are category pages. So we, as a default, don't really go into product pages too often for them, and we just spend our time on category pages because there's still plenty of those. And more than enough to actually access there. And again, as I said, it's very rare that their actual product pages do rank particularly well. So we may as well focus on the kind of more evergreen pages that are going to be sticking around.
Yeah, I think that feeds into the next side as well around the content type and what we're focused on around like what type of content. So, when we dive into some of the nuances of focus, crawling, and exclusions, we want to make sure we're addressing and refining like basic SEO crawl strategy, like your overall business goal, essentially. This slide specifically dives into how focus crawling targets specific content and the importance of setting exclusion criteria to omit whether it's like irrelevant pages or duplicate pages. So first we'll talk about content type focus for a business focusing on specific types of content. Like let's say you're a news site focusing on articles or forums, that might be more critical. Your targeted approach ensures that the crawl is aligned with your business objectives, like driving traffic to high engagement content or showcasing your expertise in specific types of areas. There's also duplicate content avoidance. So making sure that we're able to skip duplicate pages within subsequent crawls so that we're not, wasting crawl resources by crawling the same thing over and over again. We also utilize robots that TXT and meta tags to guide crawlers. This helps in efficiently directing crawls away, again, from irrelevant or sensitive areas of your site, and also safeguarding your business's valuable online assets.
Yeah. So at the same time, excuse me. By default, Lumar will respect a robots.txt because it's kind of out of the box. We're trying to be as similar as a search engine as we possibly can be. But it is often very interesting to crawl with an ignored robots.txt because guess what? A crawler crawling your site doesn't have to obey robots.txt. And having that option turned off is a very good way of finding links to dev sites that shouldn't have been left there, or links again into sections of the site that shouldn't be public and that you're relying on a robots.txt to keep in place. So all that stuff is great. And again, when we're talking about content type, I guess the best way to think about it is a site. There's a lot of sites now that will have a news section and then maybe like an affiliate YMYL money section on the side. So I think I think some of the US newspapers do it now off the top of my head. Obviously, the way they will build out a credit card deals page, and that will change over time, but that is going to change way less frequently, and there's going to be way fewer pages within that section than there is in the US political news section, say things like that. So this is where you start looking at that and going, right, well, what needs crawling daily or weekly? But what can we get away with crawling monthly, or what maybe only needs crawling every time there's a release? Things like that to just start, because ultimately, with a tool like Lumar, you pay for your credits. You want to ensure that what you're doing is one, being as what's the best way to put it, efficient and as frugal as possible. But again, also you don't want to be crawling everything all the time because again, you're just going to generate reams of data that you don't need.
Yeah, and that feeds directly into the next topic, which is crawl frequency. Like Chris had mentioned, rarely would you ever need to crawl the entire site, but also would you need to crawl every part of the site daily or hourly or weekly, whatever it may be. Oftentimes there's a crawl strategy, maybe focusing on a larger portion of the site on a less frequent basis. And then to Chris's point, maybe the pages that you frequent or change frequently are crawled a little bit more consistently. This slide addresses how to determine the appropriate crawl frequency based on things like content updates, balancing server resources, and crawling, again, high update pages more frequently. So in the quest to optimize our website for both search engine and user experience, we want to strike the right balance in our crawl frequency. It's a delicate, but it's also a really crucial task. It's about ensuring the content is promptly indexed while also respecting the limits of our server resources. So the goal to determine the right frequency is vital. It breaks down for us into three. One, identifying the update pattern. So again, how frequently is the website content updated? And we want to schedule the crawls accordingly. Prioritizing high updated page. So prioritizing pages that have frequent updates again, like news sections, blog posts, balancing the crawl rate. So ensuring that the crawl rate does not overwhelm the server, leading to slow site performance or downtime. The example we threw below is, again, a news site may want to increase crawl rates for its latest news sections to ensure that those articles are indexed really quickly. And then some of the static pages like the About Us would probably be crawled less frequently.
Yeah. The big thing here, I think, to really pick up that I think some people don't necessarily always think about is the balancing crawl rate and server load bit at the end. Kind of regardless of the size of the site you work on. I mean, anecdotally, my wife is also an SEO, and one of the clients that she cannot crawl during business hours. I don't know if their infrastructure is that sort of flimsy, for want of a better word. But I know they notice very, very quickly when she starts crawling, an alarm bell goes off somewhere. And similarly, the seasonality of your business. So if you know that Monday morning, for example, is a really, really busy time for you, or Friday afternoon, or whatever, depending on the business, don't run your crawls then, because you might be surprised what a crawler hitting the site at 15, 20 URLs a second might do to that site. It's very easy to assume that this stuff is infinite, but it's not. And even if you don't actually cause any problems, you're also way more likely to get hit by Cloudflare or other services that are put in place in order to mitigate against things like this.
Yeah. And like Chris had mentioned around like seasonality, I think that is really feeding into things like content prioritization specifically. We want to make sure that you're prioritizing content for crawling based on the inherent value of what it is you're crawling. So we want to make sure that we're looking at things like historical, analysis to enhance that SEO effort. First, we're gonna be zoning in on what we call like high value content crawling. That's purely focusing on pages that are what we would call, MVPs, let's say. Things that are pulling the most traffic, driving conversions, giving priority to those that, build the revenue for your site. Those are high value content crawls. We also want to adjust the strategy for waves of seasonal changes. Like, let's say you're an e-commerce site and it's right before Black Friday, we probably want to kick up to the frequency of the crawls there. When we're in the thick of peak seasons or special events, we definitely want to dial up those crawl rates because things on those pages are probably changing more frequently. And we want to keep pace and stay relevant and visible for those pages. Lastly, we want to learn from historical crawls. So this is the third strategy of this pillar. We want to look back at, the past and gain insights that help us tailor our future crawl schedules. It's kind of like using your past crawls as a roadmap that can consistently update itself based on, where we've been and then adjust for where we're going. Just to put this into perspective, again, you can imagine yourself as an e-commerce site during holiday seasons. We want to make sure we're able to boost the visibility on, the pages relevant. So boosting the crawl frequency for those product pages is going to be incredibly important. But it's also making sure that the newest offerings are priced and indexed swiftly.
Yeah. When I was in-house, we had a very, very similar setup just in terms of high value content. And obviously content is a very broad word in this regard, and high value can sometimes just mean like, as well as pages that make a lot of money, pages that are more possible to have fixes made to them by dev teams, right? So I say when I was in house, we had I worked for a travel site, and obviously flights and hotels were our two big money makers. So if anything was to occur to, especially from the UK, flights to Spain, flights to New York, places like that, they were pages that got crawled frequently because they had a lot of work done to them, so they were more likely to have changes that broke them, and B, they were pages that needed to be fixed really quickly should anything happen to them, as opposed to, say, an issue to the airport parking section of the site, say, which was handled by a third party. So that was always an extra layer of difficulty there. So they would still get crawled, and we would still send tickets over to those teams. But because they were so much more difficult and took longer, and there was less ROI in fixing them, they would get crawled less often.
Awesome. I know one of the questions on the poll also mentioned around, having a lack of crawl sources to feed into the crawl itself, giving you a holistic look at your site. We at Lumar, we use various data sources to marry into that web crawl data, just again, to make sure that we have full visibility, but also to make sure that these data sources can speak to one another and give you actual insights. In the realm of SEO, understanding the full scope of your website's landscape is not only beneficial, it's crucial. We want to make sure we're able to, comprehensively look at the site, harness the, power of all the different crawl sources that we're pulling in, and then feed that into the big picture of SEO efforts. Now, in terms of leveraging multiple data sources for your crawl strategy, we want to make sure we have a diversity in data leads to make this a more effective and targeted SEO tactic. One of those being backlinks for external insights. Analyzing backlinks offer insights into how other websites and users perceive your site. It helps identify potential partnerships, content gaps, and also areas of authority. Sitemaps for structured crawling. Sitemaps guide crawlers to all relevant pages, ensuring no critical content is overlooked. They are especially useful for large sites with numerous pages. Third would be log files for user behavior. Log file analysis reveals how users and search engines interact with your site. This data is invaluable for understanding actual traffic patterns, crawler behavior, and potential server issues. The last two, I'm sure everyone's familiar with. One, Google Search Console for search performance. So providing data directly from Google's perspective, insights like performance, visibility issues, etc. And Google Analytics for user engagement. So GA delivers in-depth information on user engagement, whether that's traffic, traffic sources, etc. This data helps tailor SEO strategies to actual user behavior and preferences. So synthesizing all this different information, we don't just get one isolated piece of the puzzle, if you will. We're giving you a full 360-degree view of your website's SEO performance. So again, we really want to make sure we're empowering your strategic decisions by giving you that holistic look.
Yeah, the interesting thing I think about, excuse me again, big web, like really big websites, like tens of millions of URLs, is it obviously gets to a point where quite often you don't know what you've got. And you don't necessarily know what is, you know what your focuses are, but you might not properly know what is organically your kind of mid to long tail focus. And that's why we get a lot of benefit for really big sites out of crawling URLs based on number of clicks from Search Console or based on GA traffic. Because what that allows us to do is crawl the top 50,000 pages, say, according to Google, according to GSC on your site. And that's always fascinating because obviously quite often there's stuff in there that people don't necessarily think is a focus page. And then the other thing about that is it really helps us to see, it helps us monitor. The interesting thing, again, talking about learning from past crawls, is noting what just starts to drop out of that. Because obviously there's always going to be a little bit of churn at the bottom, but looking at the middle and kind of saying, oh, well, hey, this page was like, this page had X number of visits last month. It's now not in here at all. What's happened with that? That's interesting stuff to look at. Again, I think the temptation is always to push everything in. But again, that can lead to noise quite quickly. And again, this is where that flexibility comes from. Like backlinks is really useful. You don't necessarily want that coupled with just a web crawl, because then you end up in a position where you start panicking that there's problems with your site, but they're just being generated by weird or broken or old backlinks. So it's about being smart about which ones you choose.
Yep. And in terms of just expanding on something we mentioned earlier as well, using past crawls is also very important for being able to refine and target future crawls more effectively. So leveraging historical data to really focus on areas that have undergone significant changes, leveraging, past patterns for analyzing previous crawl results and identifying trends or areas that maybe need more frequent attention. In essence, we're trying to make sure that we're building almost like a feedback loop where each crawl cycle is informed by the last. We want to create a continuously improving process. This is a way that we're not just trying to save time, but also resources to ensure that this SEO strategy going forward is grounded in, historical lessons, if you will. And yeah, just making sure that we stay highly relevant and highly visible in, the landscape of SEO in the sense.
Yeah.
Oh. I was just gonna say, just like the blurb at the bottom there, as an example, as an online store, manually crawling top performing product pages, and after an update, just to ensure that the changes are indexed properly and quickly.
Yeah. The interesting thing I think on this is when we talk about learning from past patterns and leveraging previous crawls, that might be as simple as every time this team makes a change to the site, something breaks, or you know what I mean, or last time we made a change to the head of the site, the canonical tags broke, or this weird issue seems to strike the site all the time. Again, when I was in house, we had this bizarre issue where maybe 3 or 4 times a year, the footer of our blog, which had no, it was the main website footer, which would have our about us links and legal and all those things that you kind of have to have. Those links would disappear and be replaced with the content of the blog post. And we never really knew why that was. So we had a number of different things set up to catch that. One of the things we had was a daily crawl of that particular section of the site, just to kind of verify what the content was in it. So yeah, effectively, if you are aware that something has a tendency to break, or as I say, sometimes it might be as upsetting as it is, that this team has a habit of breaking this or that because they don't align too well with kind of SEO as a product, it's worth focusing on.
Next, we're going to dive into some of the more nuanced crawling around parity crawling. First, talking through things around content and functionality pairing. So, there's a line between things like desktop and mobile internet usage. We want to make sure we're able to maintain consistency with the content that is being provided around both those types of platforms. We wanted to make sure that also we're able to have a seamless experience, whether we're surfing on our phone or surfing on, a desktop. So one is consistency across platforms. It's essential to the information that's available. This means that things like articles, product listings, blog posts, any other key content that's available is formatted suitably for both desktop, but also for smaller screens, and ensuring that no user misses out on any sort of like valuable information because of the choice of their device type.
Yeah, the other side of this obviously is, and you see it less now. Most sites tend to be mobile optimized now, or have tend to be responsive in some way. But yeah, quite often we will get bits of work coming where a section of a site or a site is being taken from an old M dot to a new responsive version or something like that. And essentially the way you can do this, and you can do this with any crawler really, is crawl the site using, let's say we're doing a desktop versus mobile parity test. You crawl the site using a desktop user agent. You then switch to a mobile user agent and crawl again and compare what the differences are. Because if you keep the changes literally just the user agent, begins to show you. Sorry, Jeremy, I think I've trampled all over your next slide here, but it's it allows you to then say, right, these are the things that are different when a mobile user approaches the site. I'll let you skip on to the next slide because I was about to ruin that one as well.
No, I think what you mentioned is, it's important for this next slide as well. The responsiveness of the design, it's not just like a trend, it's really, really, really important. This slide delves into like the crucial role of responsive design. So we want to make sure we have adaptive design for different screens. We want to make sure there's a fluidity or adaptability. So that means crafting your website in a way or a layout that is able to be adjusted. The goal is to ensure that, again, every user, regardless of how they access the web, is met with their optimal viewing or interaction experience. Load time analysis, also critical. Slow loading times are a major deterrent for users and can negatively impact your site search engine rankings. So by analyzing and comparing page load times across devices, we can pinpoint bottlenecks and optimize for speed. So faster loaded times translate to happier users and a boost in SEO performance. So again, really important priority in regards to responsive web design. For just in general SEO strategy consistency, we want to make sure there is consistency across platforms, whether that's keyword optimization or meta tagging, down to things like structured data or just uniformly implementing the same SEO best practices. And then lastly, cross-device testing. This is, I think, what Chris was mentioning earlier. We want to make sure that we have the ability to run these parity crawls between mobile and desktop, because the regular testing for SEO and usability issues across device types makes sure that we have the visibility that we need on this type of issue, and that there is ongoing evaluation to help identify any sort of discrepancies in performance or rankings between those two device types.
Yeah, not a whole lot to add from me on this one. I think I've already kind of said my piece on this.
Cool. And next is just around some custom extractions. We at Lumar, we focus primarily on technical SEO, but every industry and every one of your sites is unique and, has its own specific nuances. It's important to identify what that niche data is for extraction and being able to extract that. So custom extractions, that's something that we offer at Lumar. I know that's something that is offered at other platforms as well, but we want to make sure we're able to crawl your site at scale for not only these SEO issues and metrics, but also tying that in and pulling in, those more specific data points that are relevant to your industries into the same crawl.
Yeah, I could talk infinitely about custom extractions and more specifically custom JavaScript, which is where things get really, really exciting. Effectively, so as well as the stuff that Jeremy mentioned, I mean, when I was in-house, it was my job every year to identify all the instances of last year that needed to be updated on the site, which was a thankless task, but we were the main we were the team in the business that had access to crawling tools that were kind of the security team and things like that. But custom JavaScript gets really exciting because we can then start doing strange things to pages. We can remove site sections and see how well things get crawled. By site sections, I mean elements off pages. We can just strip them out. Or again, you can do interesting things like you can count the number of certain elements on the page. So if you have a theory that pages with X or Y particular content type on it rank well, we can count those, or we can say, does this content exist on that page? I mean, literally anything that you can do in the client with JavaScript, we can run. I mean, as long as you can do it within about 10 seconds, which is a very long time in terms of JavaScript. But we can also do things like connect up then using that to external APIs. So if you want to take that URL and do something with to it on an external API, we can do that as well. This is the majority of what I spend my time doing, really, for a lot of clients. Some really, really interesting custom stuff, and I think it's one of the few things, especially within Lumar, that it's a little bit of a USP of ours, but it's also something that we don't talk about enough, I think.
Yeah, one example I always like to throw out is we have some pharmaceutical clients. They require something called like an ISI breadcrumb on every drug page, or else they're susceptible to legal issues here in the US. That's something that we're able to crawl at scale, make sure that those are on those relevant pages, and make sure that they don't get sued, God forbid. So yeah. Next is user agents. So we kind of mentioned this earlier with the device types, but user agents as well. We want to make sure when we're trying to, simulate how a site appears and operates across, a myriad of devices and browsers. We want to make sure we're able to, ensure every user, regardless of their choice of technology, is met with that functionality and design. So being able to mimic various device types is incredibly important. This means browsing environments like smartphones, tablets, and desktops, like mentioned earlier. But it also means testing across different browsers. So beyond device types, being able to look at different browsers like Google or Bing. Also based on where you're located or where your markets are. It could be Baidu, it could be Naver. So making sure that we're testing across browsers, specifically for the relevant browser in your market, is incredibly important. It's also important for responsive design. So the importance of responsive design can't be overstated. Utilizing different user agents can test responsive design elements and validate its effectiveness across devices and browsers. This validation is indispensable for ensuring that our design adapts as intended. And lastly is detecting device-specific issues. Again, we want to make sure we're able to uncover and address problems that maybe only manifest in certain devices or within specific browsers. So whether it's something like touchscreen functionality or maybe something that is being identified on a specific type of browser or device type, we want to make sure, we're able to address all of those under the sun. One example below is if you consider the scenario of a travel booking site, by employing different user agents, they can test across major browser devices. They can also test across different IP and locations. But in general, we just want to ensure that our site is versatile and adaptable.
Yeah, I weirdly, and I've never really understood quite why we see so much of this, but so many sites just behave differently when approached by Google, do strange things like serve different canonical tags or a number of different things. So again, going back to that parity idea, sometimes like a user agent parity test is a really, really interesting thing to do, just to switch from standard Chrome to Googlebot and just say, okay, is there anything different here? What are we serving to Google that we're not serving to users? Also, using things like search engine user agents can help you identify things like hacked content and some strange stuff like that as well. So it's always well worth doing.
Yeah. And again, in terms of what we're doing here is we want to make sure we can impersonate every one of those search engine crawlers. We also want to understand the effectiveness of the crawl from the search engine perspective, and potentially circumventing rather anti-bot measures. We want to make sure we're able to carefully navigate websites with those anti-bot measures, especially if you are looking to crawl from a competitive lens. Sometimes that's important. We want to make sure that there's ways to navigate those competitor sites. Within the competitive arena of SEO, we want to make sure, or rather, it's an essential component to a robust SEO strategy. So systematically analyzing competitors' websites, businesses can uncover tactics that make them successful and identify opportunities for differentiation and improvement. It essentially boils down to benchmarking performance. So crawling competitor websites against your own to benchmark your site against others in the industry can help understand things like your strengths, their weaknesses. It can also help you identify areas where you can improve or differentiate your own site.
Yeah. The other interesting thing about this as well is crawling, but basically asking the question, what happens if Googlebot hits the site really hard? It's the kind of the only way you can, or one of the few ways you can stress test this thing. Again, we have some clients where even when IPs and user agents and things are explicitly allow listed, there's like another fail safe even further down that can shut these things down. So it's always really, really interesting to just try this stuff and run it with a user with a search engine user agent at a decent speed and just say, like, right, well, what happens if Googlebot does decide to crawl this hit the site 10,000 times in a day, which sometimes it does 100,000 times in a day. The last thing you want to do is start serving 403s, 503s, etc.
Yeah, I know you mentioned regional IPs. I think we spoke to that a little bit earlier as well. Regional IPs is also super relevant, especially when you're looking at like the global landscape of the internet. If you have different markets in different areas, we want to make sure we're able to assess region-specific content. So at the core of this strategy, it's around using regional IPs, which allow you to experience the web as users from those different geographic locations, whether it's promotional offers, product availability, cultural content, adaptions, or understanding these various various markets. We want to make sure we have this geo-targeted crawling strategies as well.
Yeah, the only thing I wanted to add to that around locale stuff is, especially if your site does a lot of geo redirection, then using these can be really, really useful just to understand again what happens if a non-human user tries to circumnavigate the site. Because sometimes things can get real funky if you're relying purely on IP location detection.
And I think we're coming close to some of the last few here. This one is around crawling your staging environment. So speaking to, your live versus staging parity crawls. The launch or update of a redesign, maybe you're releasing new pages. This is both opportunity, but also risk. So this slide specifically explores the strategic practice of crawling, again, both your staging and live versions of the site to, be almost like a critical checkpoint to assess the impact of changes. So in terms of things like comparative analysis, we want to make sure that the comparative analysis allows you to pinpoint exactly how the proposed changes will alter your live site's functionality, appearance, and SEO performance. This is a methodical approach to ensure that updates will deliver the intended improvements. Pre-launch error detection. One of the primary benefits of crawling the staging site is the early detection of errors. So whether it's something like broken links or missing metadata or suboptimal load times, identifying these issues in a controlled environment prevents them from, tarnishing your live site's user experience and, God forbid, affect your SEO ranking. Sorry.
So the only thing sorry, I'm talking over you now, Jeremy.
No, the last one here is just talking around SEO value protection and SEO impact forecasting. So we want to make sure we can anticipate the outcome of site updates. That's why it's really important to crawl that staging environment. It's also to do this ongoing. So we want to ensure that these updates don't disrupt anything, on an ongoing basis as well.
Yeah. The big thing I wanted to mention here as well is it's great crawling your staging environment in order to, so one, let's say you're doing a big migration, the big update coming, you might crawl the site as part of the testing of that migration, but also, as Jeremy said, do run a crawl across, even if it's a part of your staging site, with some frequency, just to identify things like someone's taken all the no index tags off staging, say, or something like that. Or again, there may well be a change that you are not particularly privy to that has knocked out, even sometimes accidentally, that has knocked out a vital piece of SEO again. Someone's been messing around with the head of the page and has broken canonical tags, or X or Y has happened and this piece of content is no longer on the page or whatever. So just having that crawl there means that, one, it stops your dev environment, your staging environment from getting crawled, and also it stops bad things happening to your live site from an SEO perspective.
Awesome. Now, last few slides are really just around the Lumar product, just to highlight our flexible crawling capabilities. Again, essentially everything that we've covered today is included within our platform, just to make sure that we have that holistic approach. One being that the crawl sources. So again, making sure that we are able to pull together not only your web crawler data, but also marrying that data with things like sitemaps, backlinks, GSC, GA, log files, or any specific URL list that you want to amend, thereby giving you those actual insights and making sure that these data sets can speak to one another. We also offer, in terms of the frequency of crawling, since we are cloud-based, scheduled crawls. So if you want to crawl daily, weekly, bi-weekly, whatever cadence it is you prefer for that specific crawl, that's all stuff that is going to be available within the Lumar platform. And in terms of the crawl scope as well, we can exclude different parts of your site. You can also crawl from different user agents, IPs, regional IPs, for mobile versus desktop. And of course, we do offer those custom extractions. And lastly, we also do offer the capability of crawling both your staging environment as well as your live site. So whether that's through your test site domain, custom DNS, or authentication, we want to make sure that we're able to provide that visibility within both your live and staging environment. Now we have one more poll question here, which is around whether or not you would like a Lumar demo. And before we give everyone a minute or two to answer that, and we'll dive into some Q&A.
I was going to say, regardless of your answer to this one, if you do have any questions for myself or Jeremy, do feel free to ask them in a couple of minutes. Or I mean, if you can start putting them in the chat now, if you'd like. Or if everybody's feeling shy, I think we do have a couple of pre-submitted ones.
We have a few. One is around making sure we're able to crawl competitor sites. So how are you able to crawl competitor sites without being blocked? Within Lumar specifically, we have a specific mode within our advanced settings called stealth mode. Essentially what it does is it mimics a user agent, or it mimics an actual user, and it randomizes the user agent and IP at every request. It also crawls at a much slower speed, so thereby bypassing a lot of the blocking capabilities, especially if you are looking for competitive crawls. That can be really advantageous. We have one other question that came in. What is the importance of Core Web Vital for SEO?
So, I mean, in this regard, so we can do a lot of crawling Core Web Vital stuff, and especially again when we come back to that parity question, I think it's always worth testing this stuff. I do feel like officially it's a ranking factor. I also believe officially they've said that it's like a tiebreaker. So effectively, if you have two websites that are exactly the same and one's a bit faster than the other, then that one will win out. But I think broadly speaking, the most important thing, I wouldn't focus necessarily entirely on Core Web Vitals, or that's really useful. But crux data is actually what users are seeing, right? And by tracking that, and again, actually using custom JavaScript, we can pull crux data into the tool. It actually allows you to see how real users are using the site. And that's the important thing, is whatever site you're working on, don't just test it on your desktop, on a wired internet connection or whatever. Wherever possible, actually take your device. You use the site in the environment in which you think it's going to be used. So if you run a train ticket website, for instance, try and order a train ticket while sat in a train station. You know what I mean? And see how easy it actually is to do that within the web app. Yeah, that's it. It's not going to make and break anything, I don't think, unless your site is really slow. But also at the same time, I think again we know that the numbers around conversion, etc., only go up when sites get faster.
Just we have one other question within the Q&A chat, which is, what is an average flexible crawl strategy for an e-commerce site?
For an e-commerce site, I think as somebody mentioned in the chat before, you're probably looking at doing something like crawling main products with frequency. I would say, depending on the size of the site, you're probably going to look at your top 10% or so of products and crawling them. I mean, ideally daily, because again, it's one of those, there's a lot of businesses out there that kind of live and die on single products sometimes. So if you have those top 10% of pages that are being crawled daily, you can very quickly then start to notice and find problems with them. Also, again, to be frank, if you're crawling your top 10% of pages daily, you're going to pick up on a lot of template issues and things like that as well. If all of a sudden you come in and every page in your daily crawl is broken, it's a good guess that a vast majority of the site might be broken in the same way. So you can quickly get in and make those fixes. Then on the back of that, category pages, which in theory will change less often, it would be worth crawling them weekly, I would say. Again, depending on how rapidly changing your businesses. I'd be looking at crawling those weekly and ideally crawling all of them. Then after that, obviously things like the blog, weekly, weekly to monthly, I would say, and then kind of your big full site crawls. I mean, again, depending if you're a really big mature ecom business, it might be a quarterly crawl of the entire site, because say for some sites that's absolutely enormous. And a lot of the time, what you're going to find in that is really either a lot of low value issues or a lot of just weird stuff that needs clean up as part of hygiene, but isn't necessarily going to tank the business. Because, you know, if you're not noticing it, if you're only noticing it in the 3 monthly crawl, it means it's not having a material impact on your bottom line, right? So
Yeah, we have one final question
yep.
from Sembhav. So he says, let's say I have done some tasks as suggested by the tool. How would I measure the impact of those tasks on SERP? Does Lumar provide ranking impact? So I can answer this. In terms of measuring impact, Lumar has a really, really great system. We call it a health score, essentially. It provides almost like a holistic score, whether that's across your whole site or a different section of your site. It looks at all the different reports that we pull in, and then takes into account all the different issues that we pick up to give you this almost like common language or common KPI out of 100. That's how we kind of measure impact going forward. It's also benchmarked against an industry benchmark, so you can actually see when we do make changes, is this increasing our overall SEO health, or perhaps the health of a specific part of the site that we're working on. In regards to providing ranking impact, Lumar is primarily focused on technical SEO, though a lot of our clients like to leverage our data in conjunction with ranking data. Everything within our platform is portable. We do have a fully accessible API as well, so a lot of our clients like to pull the Lumar data and then have that live with, supplementary data around ranking. If that answers your question. And I think, yeah, no problem. Last slide here. If you're ready to take a deeper dive, feel free to request a demo. There's also a blog or our blog, which you can check out at your own leisure. And then we also do have a webinar coming up on the 29th of February around the importance of site speed. So with that, let everyone go, give some people some time back, but thank you all for joining.
Thanks very much, folks.